Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sacred Flame podcast. It is I, Matthias Nordvig, and I am joined, as always, by.
Amina Auto.
Yeah, it's a new year. Happy New Year, everybody.
Yeah, Happy New Year. We hope you survived the holidays, however you choose to observe them.
Yeah, I mean, and with that, I guess, Amina, how have you survived the holidays?
I have, which is good.
It's a start.
I'm looking, it's a start. Looking forward to getting back to more of a routine, which will be nice, and the start of a new term at school and teaching again, and probably a bit less consumption of mince pies and chocolate. But overall, yeah, I'm just looking forward to getting back to a bit of normalcy without all the hecticness. How about you,
Mm.
Matthias?
I'm not looking forward to getting back to normalcy. I could keep doing this instead of going back to work, but you gotta earn your keep.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have classes starting very soon, actually. Second week of January, so that's very soon.
Hmm.
Yeah. So back into the humdrum of teaching. I'll be teaching witchcraft. Nordic witchcraft and
Ooh.
magic. Not actual. It's not. When I say that, people are always like, "Oh, it's like some kind of Harry Potter course or something like this." Like, here are the spells, and now we are brewing witch's brew. And does anybody have more Eye of Newt and all that kind of stuff? But no, that's not exactly what it is. It's a history of witchcraft
Mm.
in Scandinavia from, you
Still
know,
very interesting.
yeah, I would say that it's actually more interesting in my opinion, but I'm also not trying to be a wizard.
Well,
So yeah.
same.
Um but yeah, so teaching that and then also Old Norse mythology. And on that note, Amina, we shan't forget for me to plug my new book.
Yes, Matthias
Yes.
wrote unpublished a really amazing book, An Introduction
Yeah.
to the Poetic Edda and Prose Edda, which is a really
Hmm.
fantastic way to approach the most illustrious primary sources that we have for Old Norse mythology for anyone interested. Matthias taught me most of what I know about Norse mythology way back in the dark ages of what, 2014, 2015,
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
when I was a wee undergrad. And he hasn't got rid of me since, so clearly it was a really good course.
Thank
And
you for
I'm
that.
still learning about it. I read the Eddas all the time for various purposes. And I'm so excited that Matthias has finally published an introduction to working with these amazing sources that we have.
Why, thank you, Amina. That's actually very kind of you to say. Yeah. So what I've done here is I've taken those 10 years of experience teaching English speaking, primarily English speaking students, Old Norse mythology specifically, and poured all of that into this book, Old Norse Mythology, An Introduction to the Poetic Edda and Prose Edda. And the way that I approach um, this material is kind of like the opposite of what you otherwise typically see with like these like dictionary style, where
Mm.
you basically go through Old Norse mythology alphabetically and look up any deity or figure or being whatever you're interested in knowing about, which are also very helpful handbooks. But what I noticed was that generally there's no introduction that takes the perspective of like the sources that all of this information actually come from, right?
Hmm.
These two main books that we have, the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, both from the 13th century, both written in Iceland. There's, of course, other sources as well, but you can't fit everything into a book. I might have to write a follow-up for for that.
Please
Um,
do.
yeah, but those are the primary sources that we use when we teach Old Norse mythology in a sort of like an introductory class. And I figured it would be a good idea to have a book that basically goes through all these like primary poems and sections of Snorri Sturluson's prose Edda, as we typically like to call it, breaking down the chapters and what is the guy actually doing here? What is he saying? Why is he saying this as opposed to something else? And all that stuff. And I would say it's a highly critical approach as well. Um,
Yes.
where, yeah, so one of the things that, and I don't want to throw shade on any of my colleagues who have authored very good books on this topic as well. They certainly have. Each book come with their own, advantages and flaws. And
Mhm.
I'm sure mine will also have some flaws in there of various kinds that I'm sure some of my colleagues will find and
I'll let
pick
you
out
know.
and let me know. Because that's just the name of the game. That's how it always goes. Like, but one of the things that I find problematic with these like synthesized representations where
Mhm.
you have like this rundown of Odin, for instance, is that they rarely take into account just the level to which and somebody who wrote this material back in the medieval period might have actually doctored it. You know, how they
Right.
might have actually picked out specific details to represent for a specific
Mhm.
reason, right? And that's something that we can say about a lot of these sources, that that's definitely what happened. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to present here. So if you have any interest in this book, you can always find it on, I'm sure it's available through Amazon or something like that, but the publisher is Routledge, big academic publisher, and you can just go and Google Old Norse mythology, Mathias Nordvik, and you probably find it. So yeah, try that. And hopefully it won't cost you an arm and a leg, but I cannot promise anything because that's how academic publishers roll,
Yes.
unfortunately.
Mhm.
All right.
Oh, well, I look forward to reading it. I'll get my hands on a copy. I'll demand
Of
that
course you
my
will.
library order it.
Yes, or maybe you can order a review copy or something like that.
Ooh, I would love that. I'd love
Yes.
to review this.
Yeah. And then like just like
Excellent.
destroy me in some kind of journal somewhere.
I would never. Some of those, if you are ever bored and for some reason have an interest in how academics interact, just go read reviews. Some of them are absolutely hilarious.
I mean, yeah,
But
like
no.
it's sort of like a precursor to anything that happens on social media, right?
Yes, it's so true with so many more words. Like
Yes.
think of any battle you've seen on Facebook or Twitter between two celebrities and apply that to very niche academic topics, and that's what
Mm.
reviews are essentially. So it's very entertaining, and you learn a lot about which books are rubbish and why, according to whom.
Yes. Or maybe you learn more about somebody's psyche than
Yes, I think so. It's very revealing about the author.
All
Oh,
right. Yeah.
right. Well, should we get
Wonderful.
into our topic for today?
Yes, let's do that. We leave the academic drama behind and go straight to the
And
weather,
yes, we are discussing the weather, which is a
right?
very British thing
Boring.
to do. It's a very,
It's absolutely
very
boring.
safe topic. Always doing something new or not.
Yeah, so
So
so if
Matthias,
what's
how's
that?
the weather in Colorado?
It's sunny and shiny as always. It's
Yeah.
either sunny or a blizzard.
Hmm.
And we have 300 days of sunshine here.
It's disgusting.
Um, yeah. Is it? Is it really? Are
I think
you?
so. I mean, over here it's gray and drizzly as
Hmm.
usual.
Yeah,
Uh, so I don't think I've actually seen proper sunlight in several weeks.
that
But
sounds disgusting to me.
yeah, it's not that bad. 300 days of sunshine is far too much. But the sun did play quite an important role. So did the rain, so
Yeah.
did the changing seasons, so did the
Hmm.
clouds, so did the winds.
Yeah. And
And
like,
I
so,
think there's, yeah. Hmm.
just
Go
for
ahead.
like sort of like background information for anybody listening here. Amina and I, we decided we were going to make a podcast to kick off the new year, and she was like, "Okay, so what are we talking about?" And I was like, "I don't know, the weather." And that's how we ended up with this. And it is not a just like a shooting from the hip kind of thing, because there's a lot of like weather stuff in Old Norse mythology, in all of the Nordic traditions, really, the northern traditions. And that is because it's so very important. And we have already gotten into that subject in some of the previous podcasts. For not what was it like a couple podcasts ago I completely butchered that the Irish folktale about the cow, and someone was kind enough to remind me of the actual folktale, right? And it's actually the story about how March got a couple extra days
Hmm.
because March and April teamed up in spite, like to be very spiteful towards this particular cow that thought it could just like run around in the field and be unbothered by the weather, and then that last blizzard in the end of March killed it off. And I mean, there's something I really appreciate that. It's like
Spiteful weather teaming up
spiteful
against
weather. Yes.
livestock. Those cocky cows, those cocky Irish cows,
Yeah.
think
Fuck
they're
that
all
cow.
that. Fuck that cow. Well,
Blitz.
cows are incredibly important in Irish literature. Once you get into
Hmm.
the early medieval stuff, it's all about the cows. There's
Hmm.
one of the most famous tales of the Ulster cycle is the Toinbal Cunha, which is the cattle raid of Cooley, which is all about these two massive bulls. Well, it's about people going to war to get a certain bull because they only had one really fantastic bull, but they wanted two.
Mm.
And there, I mean, that's just one example of Irish literature centered around cows. So it doesn't surprise me that another very important factor, the weather or the seasons, the changing seasons, would also feature in a story like that. So it's fascinating to see the Irish material as well. And
Yeah.
we've talked a lot about seasonal change, but what is seasonal change but a change in the weather and
Mhm.
the type of weather that you experience more often at certain times in the year?
Exactly.
Because
Yeah.
as we know, near the equator where there isn't much change in how much sunlight you're getting or what angle of sunlight it is or how long or short the days are, there's not a lot of rituals attached to seasons. There's you
Hmm.
kind of get flood and not flood,
Hmm.
or monsoon and not monsoon. And that's
Yeah.
it. But you don't really have like summer, winter, fall, spring, these big, like major differences in one part of the year to the other. One bit is just a bit more wet than the other bit.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, and that's how I guess Colorado would be actually if we were, by the ocean. But since we're, a high plains, inland and mountains, then we get seasons.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, because I mean we are like kind of at the same, if I remember correctly, the same latitude as like North Africa, the northern
Hmm.
parts of North Africa. So
Yes.
yeah,
A lot of people forget how North Europe actually is. To put some
yeah.
context on it, New York City and Rome are at the same latitude.
Yes. Yeah, New York
Yeah.
City and Rome, which is also
Mhm.
fascinating because the
Yeah.
weather in both places is so very different, right?
Very different.
Yeah,
Yep.
and I mean New York and the reason that New York has the type of climate it has is because of the oceanic currents and all that stuff. So it's colder there. And this is what people also don't really realize about Scandinavia and the British Isles for that matter is that it's actually quite warm compared to where it's at in terms of
Mhm.
latitude. And that's thanks to
Yes.
the Atlantic current that brings hot or warm water northwards along the European coast.
Yes.
and
Yep.
so you get like
We
palm
have
trees
palm
and so
trees
yeah.
here in the UK. Yeah.
Yeah.
The first time I brought my partner to the UK, he lost his mind because there were palm trees everywhere and he didn't think they should be there. And he really hated it. Drove him absolutely mad. He was so unhappy because palm trees in his mind do not belong in London or Wales or Edinburgh.
Yeah, how dare
Or
they?
I know, so rude. But they live there quite happily thanks to this Atlantic current that's bringing warm ocean water up from the equator.
hmm But then,
So, yeah.
it stops somewhere around Greenland and it doesn't go down,
Yeah.
south on the American coast. So New York doesn't get all that nice warm water from over here,
Nope.
unfortunately. Um, but yeah, so again, going back to why are we talking about the weather, and it is, as I said, there's actually a decent amount of time spent on that in Old Norse mythology. The poem Vafthrudnir Sayings, where Odin has this battle of wisdom and knowledge with this giant or Jötun called Vafthrudnir, which means something like w riddle weaver or something to that effect.
Mhm.
Um, they get into it there, right? It's some of the first
Mhm.
things that they're really talking about, and they get like um and it seems to be sort of a feature of wisdom. If you know how the celestial things work, essentially, right? And keep in mind
Mhm.
too, back then, to these people, there wasn't a big difference between the sun and the moon and the changing seasons and weathers and all that kind of stuff in the sense that they had no perception of depth, right? In that sense, they didn't
Mhm.
know that the sun was like, millions of miles and kilometers away from us, and I don't actually know how far it is from from the Earth. Amina, you taught astronomy at some point.
93 million miles away, I believe.
Yes,
It
something like that.
takes about
Yeah.
8 minutes for sunlight to reach us,
Yes.
whereas the moon is much closer.
hmm
But they have the exact same perceived size in the sky, which is a really interesting coincidence.
hmm
And that is why we can have solar eclipses.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Speaking of astronomy, one of the fun theories that is bandied about by astronomers is what would aliens find the most interesting about Earth? And a lot of people say eclipses. That would be a huge thing for alien tourism. If you can come get in the line of totality of an eclipse where the moon completely covers the sun from
Mm-hmm.
Earth for a few minutes at a time, that is a phenomenon that doesn't really occur anywhere else in certainly not in our solar system, where
hmm
the moon and the sun are the same exact size. And you get a few planets where the moon is a lot bigger than the sun, but it's exactly the same apparent size to us on Earth, which is why they're often given the same kind of significance in a lot of these mythologies, and they're often seen as equals or partners or
hmm
rivals, or they interact a lot because they are equally perceptible in the sky
Yeah.
for us. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There, so many traditions see them as siblings, for instance,
Hmm.
which is the case, at least in some versions of Nordic mythology, and Inuit mythology as well. Like if you go to Greenland, it's a story about a brother and a sister.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's that's actually quite fascinating to think about that this like coincidence essentially has occurred,
Yeah.
especially when you also know the background for the creation of the moon. I mean, it supposedly the result of a cosmic collision between the Earth and some other planet, as far as I
Yes.
have been told.
Yep.
So that's also kind of wild.
Yeah. It was during it's referred to as the period of heavy bombardment where the solar system was forming and sorry for the astronomy lesson on a mythology podcast, but
No, go
you
ahead. It's
basically
part of it.
all of the planets and the sun and all of the planets around it in our solar system form from this massive accretion disk, which was once just a load of dust and particles. So when the sun formed, it was kind of the center of everything and everything spun around it. And things started to stick together and form bigger and bigger pieces. But while there were still a load of smaller pieces flying about, they were crashing into each other. So it was essentially like a big circle pit, if you've ever been to a metal show.
Nice. Yes.
And so, at a period where the Earth had kind of mostly formed into what it was going to look like, something really large crashed into it and knocked off a whole lot of the material that was forming into it. But that material didn't go very far. It just kind of hung around the Earth, which was big enough to have a bit of gravity. So,
Mm,
it accreted into this ball that we now call the moon and stayed around the Earth, or what became our Earth, and became tidally locked,
mm,
which means that the same face of the the moon is always facing us. I'm sure you've heard of the dark side of the moon. And different parts of that face are lit up by the sun depending on where the Earth or where the moon is in its orbit around the Earth. So that's why it
mm.
changes shape. That's why you see it in the sky at different times. But that is Earth material that just hasn't gone very far and has kind of stuck to the gravitational field of the Earth.
That's pretty
Yeah.
damn cool.
Hmm. Very cool.
Yeah, so that was the astronomy version of I guess the questions that Odin is asking Vathul in the end.
Yeah. So
Because
Vafthrunir wants to be really pedantic. He said
yes.
that.
No, so yeah, they get into it in stanzas 23 to 28 roughly
Mm.
where Odin asks where the moon came from, and we've all just heard that. But Vathunir's version of that is that Mundilferi, he is called the father of moon and likewise of sun. They must circle through the sky every day to count the years for men. So basically, here we get a story about this figure named Mundilferi, who's otherwise very elusive in Old Norse mythology. I think you can translate the name roughly to something like actually the thing that makes the moon travel or something like that. Um
Yeah,
s-
because
s-
it has that like fara element
yeah.
or alfara.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that seems to be what we're really talking about here. Just like I think it might actually be sort of a Viking way of saying I don't know, but that's a different conversation. So then
Where are
after
we
that,
going?
then after that he asks where day comes from, he who passes over mankind, or night with its new moons. And then Vathuni tells us Detling he is called, he is day's father, and night was born of Nur. New moon and dark of the moon, the beneficent powers made to count the years for men. Then Odin goes on and says, from where winter comes from, warm summers, first among the wise powers. And Vafuna says, Wind Cool, he is called, winter's father, and Mild One, the father of summer. And that's sort of like the rundown of that. And then we, of course, also have the question about where the winds come from overall in another section of the poem, where we're told that that is the giant. This is in stanza 37. The giant called Hreisvellir. And here I'm using, as I always do, Caroline Larrington's translation because I find that that is the best one when you're like trying to learn about Old Norse mythology because she translates
Mhm.
so many names. So she's
Yeah.
translated Hreisvellir to carrion swallower, which is
Mhm.
a solid translation. He is called, who sits at heaven's end, a giant in eagle's shape. From his wings, they say, the wind blows over all men. And so this all this stuff comes together as sort of the basis for, I guess, astronomy and meteorology in the Viking Age. How Scandinavians presumably would have understood
Mhm.
the origin of these things. And this is where we want to also remind everybody that we're dealing with an animistic tradition, right? A
Mm.
tradition that thinks in relations and relationality all the time.
Mhm.
Um, and the way that we can see that is that they understood the relationship of sun and moon and all of these elements in their world as genealogic relationships, right? They have
Mhm.
fathers here in this context, and mothers as well, and so everything sort of like is a genealogic evolution in their eyes. And Amina, is there anything similar in the Gaelic stuff? Anywhere that you can point to where we see
So
similar conceptions?
there is a lot of stuff, especially in like Bronze Age and Neolithic pokings around about kind of sun cults or sun worship. Not as much in the medieval Celtic stuff. We do have the holiday Imbolc or St. Bridget's Day, St. Bride's Day, which comes, it's celebrated on the 1st of February, and it kind of marks halfway between the winter solstice and the spring equinox.
Hmm.
And Breed is often associated with light and warmth and fire, but she's not exactly tied to weather in any way.
Mm,
But there's another festival, Lugnasa, which happens the 1st of August, which celebrates the god Luch, or the Shining One, or the Bright One. And there have been some theories put forth that he may have been a sun god or closely associated with Apollo or possibly another sun-like or light-giving deity. But again, the connections are quite tenuous.
hmm.
And we just don't have anything quite as solid about the cosmology from the Celtic side. There could be some material that I just don't know about, but it's not really as talked about as it
Right.
is in the Nordic corpus of works.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess like a place with palm trees doesn't need need to
Hey,
hold on
we
to
have
their stories.
seasons here. We need to know
Fine.
when to farm things.
All right,
But
whatever. No, I mean, yeah, I think you're right about that. And one thing to also note is that St. Lucy's and St. Bridget's, their traditions are very close to one another.
yes.
In Scandinavia, we also have St. Bridget, as I've mentioned before. Actually, there are, stories about how she comes from Ireland to
Mhm.
Scandinavia, sailing on a door for some reason.
Cool.
Yeah, this is
Like
so
that
cool.
lady like the Titanic.
The lady from the Titanic.
Yeah. Have you seen the Titanic at the end where she's
Uh,
on a door and
right,
she doesn't let
yeah.
her lover on the door? Yeah.
Yeah,
That
she
was the
couldn't
image that
couldn't
I
let
got.
poor Leo come up on the door as
Please.
well.
Gross. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
That was so she came on a door to Scandinavia.
She came on a door to Scandinavia. Do you know just how impactful it is that you mentioned the Titanic? Because the if you look at the passenger list, the of the people who died,
Hmm.
the two main ethnicities that went down with that ship were Irish and Swedish. So
Oh wow.
yeah, so again, we got some hardcore connections right there.
There you go. See, it
Um,
was relevant.
Yes, it was relevant.
She came on
Um,
a door, a la Kate Winslet, to
Kate Winslet?
Scandinavia.
Was it Kate
Isn't she?
Winslet?
Kate Winslet was the actress who
Was it?
played
Oh,
Rose. Yeah.
I thought I thought that was Romeo and Juliet. But maybe so
Now I'm questioning my pop culture. Everything that happens after about 1200, I'm really fuzzy on. So,
that's fine, right? As long as you got the
so
basics
maybe it
down.
wasn't. Anyone who's an expert on the Titanic movie, please let me know. I'm positive it was Leo DiCaprio, but now
Yeah,
I'm
it
questioning if it
was
was Kate Winslet. It was definitely Leo DiCaprio.
yeah, I'm yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah.
Um But anyway, like okay, so moving on from the Titanic that we just randomly put in there.
She comes on a door, Saint
Comes to the
Bridget.
door, yes. And in Scandinavia, at least, I don't know much about this in the insular traditions here, but in Scandinavia, there is some kind of crossover between Bridget and Saint Lucy, right? Saint
Mm.
Lucy is still a very popular tradition. Saint Bridget has sort of like fizzled out. But St. Lucy's
Mhm.
is a popular tradition in Scandinavia where we have processions on her day, the 13th of December, because that used to be in the Julian calendar, as far as I remember, that used to be the winter solstice. So you would have
Mm.
processions in honor of her with, women dressing up in white clothes and carrying candles. So we still do that.
Mhm.
Um, and as I said,
We did that at my Waldorf school.
yes, of course you did,
Yeah,
because it's a
we
Waldorf
had a
school.
Santa Lucia procession. Yeah, with the wreath around the
Hmm.
head and the four candles and the white robe.
Yes,
Yeah, so
yeah, all the
it's a very
things.
cool tradition. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
And I don't know. So there's an old word for for Imbolc in Scandinavia that in the Danish version is lucenat, which means candle night, right? And I think it's a translation of Candlemas, um,
Hmm.
a Latin version of that. No, wait, no, that's Kernel Mise. Kernel Mise and Lucinet, I think, combine a little bit. But that's like, that has something to do with light and candles as well in the beginning of February. And so yeah, it's all centered around the sun in the sense that everybody's recognizing that it's been dark for quite a while once we hit
Hmm.
February, right? And now we would like that to end, please.
Yes.
And it's
If
like
any of
slowly
you have
coming there.
ever spent January, I think is the worst month to be in Scandinavia, the UK, Iceland, Greenland, any of these like way far north places, Canada,
Hmm.
Alaska, where it's just by the time January is coming to a close, it's been dark for so long and it's been cold for so long. You're holding on to anything to get you through the last few weeks of winter.
Hmm.
And the days might be slowly lengthening, but it's not quite enough. And
No.
so having something to mark that to say like, okay, this is like the last gasp of winter, even if the weather doesn't improve, we will have more sunlight is really important
Yeah.
to any culture living at such extreme latitudes.
Yeah, because keep in mind, like February and March are still quite shitty, and you get a
Still,
bunch of blizzards and that kind of stuff.
yeah.
Again, which is why the Irish have the story about the brindled cow,
Yes.
right? That gets uh, killed off by the
Mhm.
universe
Yeah, for being
because
too
for being
cocky.
too cocky. Yeah, yeah. Because it does not understand that it needs to stay in the stable until April
Mhm.
comes. Because April is the time when you actually get some semblance of spring in the
Mhm.
north, right? So yeah, but like once you're in like middle of February, that's when you're like starting to realize, oh yeah, it is actually the days are getting longer
Mhm.
and we can see more sunlight. It's not just that like slither of light at the end of the horizon,
Yeah.
which is, the situation for Iceland, for instance, in
Mhm.
January.
Oh,
Um, yeah, that's what makes January long. That and the fact
yeah.
that January is 31 days and the
Whose
month that
idea
comes
was
after
that?
Christmas. What's that?
Whose idea was that to put
I
31
don't
days?
know. Like, could they have
That's
like thought of like something there? I mean, it's also, back in the day we used to celebrate uh what is it the Trinity on the 6th of January? There's some in Scandinavia, there's some celebrations, at least in Denmark, of Saint Knut as well,
Hmm.
as part of like the beginning of January. So like it doesn't feel like Christmas just ends abruptly now, like it does
Mhm.
nowadays, right? It's just like, okay, New Year, everybody's partying, then you're hungover January 1st, and then it kind of feels like that hangover just like sticks for a month, right?
Yeah. Uh,
If anybody is hungover.
yeah, you're going
Um,
to just feel horrible for the next 31 days. Congratulations. There are quite a few cultures that do some celebrations in early to mid-January to kind of like get through things. And then like early February, you've got well, I actually don't know if it's early February, but in February you have things like Mardi Gras in preparation for Lent. So you do have like these little boosts and these little things to kind of mark the passage of time after
mhm.
these long, monotonous, dark months. But I think a lot of that has been lost in more modern American cultures where it's just nothing until what, St. Patrick's Day, I guess.
Pretty much, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's the same with like Scandinavian traditions.
Yeah.
Well, we have Fastelavn,
Mm.
which is Mardi Gras, right?
Hmm.
We do have that, but like in Denmark, back in the 1700s, they did this crazy thing of just like lumping a bunch of saint holidays together in what they called Grand Prayer Day, which is like was two holidays, 2 days of holiday in when was that? Like it sometime in May, and it's like makes no
Ah,
sense.
okay.
Yeah, but this
Yeah,
is sort of like.
if you look back at the chronicles and annals of like Frankish annals, Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, some of the Irish annals, every freaking day is a saint's day or a feast day of some saint. So they had no end of things to observe. They
Mhm.
were having, and this was in addition to whatever local festivals they observed as well, that were either kind of a vestigial observance of a pre-Christian tradition or like more of a commercial thing, like local markets that were tied to certain times of the year, or I don't know, any kind of like traditional things that they would do to mark the passage of time in their own way. So they had
Mhm.
no problem finding things to celebrate
Exactly,
back
and that
in
goes
the
all the way
day.
back to the Romans, right? Like back in
Yeah,
in
absolutely. They were constantly having like emperors were making up new holidays for a
all the
lark all the
time.
time.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that might be where the all the saint stuff comes from, right? Like
Mhm. Yeah.
continuation of all of that, right? And yeah, so you ended up back in Rome with like, just being off every other day pretty much.
Yeah. Oh, they took a very French approach to things.
It sounds kind of nice, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is. We take
But
our
that's also
holidays
just
very
so now that everybody's like coming back to work and all that stuff after the holidays,
seriously.
let me just like depress you by letting you know that the average work time for a medieval peasant would have been like 168 days a year or something like that, which means they're
Yeah.
just above half of the actual days in the year that they would actually be working. Um, and then, of course, we're not talking 8 hours of work every day either. That's another
Yeah.
part of it all, right? Like, so
Yeah. It
when you boil
definitely
it
varies.
down, it varies a lot, right? And when you boil that all down, what you can surmise is that we work way too much nowadays. We should
We
do we
absolutely.
yeah,
We
we
should have
do.
more holidays.
We
I think we should bring
should.
back all the feast days.
I think so too.
Matthias, what is that Danish festival where they put cats in barrels and whack them with sticks? Doesn't that happen in February at some point?
Yes, that is the Mardi Gras Fastelavn,
Got it. Nice.
just like we put an
That is
effigy
festival.
of a human being, a witch, on a bonfire and light it up on St. John's Eve, we also put cats in barrels. Well, we don't put cats in barrels anymore, because people are like, that's kind of cool, don't you think?
That's kind of
This
horrible. Yeah.
Yeah, let's not be that person. So instead, to commemorate that we were that person. we we now make little paper cuts of black cats and put them on
Yeah.
barrels and beat the ever-loving
Okay.
crap out of the barrel. And the barrel is sort of like a shitty Scandinavian version of a piñata, right? Because what it really is just a barrel that you have to break. And that can be
That
tough,
sounds difficult.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and then it's full of candy, right?
Wonderful.
So there's like a incentive to break it. But at the end
Okay.
of the day, it's like I think the Mexicans figured it out by
Yes.
making piñatas of like, more easily breakable material.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah,
don't know what.
they were much more with it than the Danes on that front.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, so beating cats and barrels, that's for Mardi Gras. Um And again,
So,
I would say the Brazilians have probably, and even like the Louisianans, the New Orleaners
yeah.
have figured out Mardi Gras in a better way than the Scandinavians here.
Mhm.
Um, that's just my opinion, but I guess some people hate to beating cats. I don't know.
Better than beating cats in barrels. Well done.
Okay, so
Okay.
back to the weather, back
Back to
to
the weather.
sun and all that kind of stuff, right? So Um, I think that the main purpose in Old Norse mythology to memorize these stories about the weather, and because they are pretty significant, they are present in several sources. Um, I think the main reason is, as you sort of like vaguely pointed out before, that this is something to do with agriculture and
Mm.
understanding the cycles of the seasons and all that kind of stuff. Because in Scandinavia, in particular, it is very important to know when to sow and when to harvest, right?
Mhm.
That's especially the sowing part because you don't want to screw that up. If you like that Irish cow, don't respect the fact that there could be another blizzard, then you might have ruined your harvest for that year.
Yeah.
So that's probably part of why these stories are there. And again, we get sort of like with Old Norse mythology, we get the watered down versions. We get the tip
Hmm.
of the iceberg. There's probably a lot more detailed information somewhere in the tradition that these stories are only vaguely alluding to because the way that oral memory functions is that you have sort of like cue
Hmm.
words or cue stories that will then make you remember other stories and
Hmm.
sort of like it's a whole archive, a repertoire that can be sort of like whipped out by somebody saying this one thing, and then you like, oh, cling, I know exactly what you're talking about there,
Hmm.
right? So that might be what this is, right? And that brings us to this thing that you and I were talking about before we started recording, Amina,
Ah,
the
yes.
the sun
The
cult.
sun cult.
Yes.
When when people started getting really into the study of Indo-European mythology and folklore and pre-Christian traditions, it was very popular to ascribe everyone's beliefs to sun worship and sun cults because it seemed very obvious, and they were basing a lot of their frameworks on Mediterranean models. And if you look at things like Egyptian or Greco-Roman sources, there is very clear sun worship things going on. And so it was really easy to extrapolate that and assume that every other pre-Christian tradition revolved around sun worship and really make these traditions extremely reductive and extremely simplistic just out of convenience because they're like, well, the Greeks and Romans did it and they have a lot of material on this. So obviously any circle represents the sun and
Right.
everything is a symbol for the sun.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And
it's
that's also, I think it's also a placeholder, right? Because these people
yeah.
in the late 1700s or early 1800s, these scholars, their framework for understanding religion is a monotheistic Christian religion, right? Primarily, that's what they know. The other religions that they're familiar with, if they are familiar with other religions, are Judaism and Islam. And then there's slowly getting into Hinduism as well,
Yes.
right? This is where
As
most of
they
this stuff
colonized
really,
India.
yes, right? Like
Yeah.
as the Brits are colonizing India, more and more material from India is entering
Hmm.
the West, and this is what makes them think about religion as something more than simply Christian theology, right?
Hmm.
And so in order to try to understand what kinds of other religions exist out there, they're sort of like latching on to the idea of like a sun worship because it's this idea that if it's not Christianity, which in their minds represents civilization, then it's
Hmm.
nature. And
Hmm.
then if the worship is not God, then it must be the sun because that is the highest thing
Hmm.
that you can see in nature. And
Yes.
this is a very primitive way of understanding religion, to be honest.
Hmm. Yes.
Right? So what
Very reductive.
very reductive, right? So what you get are these scholars in England, in France, primarily, like it was specifically in London and Paris. Like
Hmm.
they're constantly in communication about this stuff, right? Who are basically just assuming that everything is an allegory of sun worship, right? Like so any myth that they're reading is just like, you know, we don't really care about what it's actually saying. We're just like trying to identify the figure that could be the sun and the a figure who could represent the darkness or something like that, and then we
Yep.
roll with that, right? That was especially Max Müller of the Oxford
Mm.
School, right? Who ended up actually becoming subject to an interpretation of himself as a sun myth.
I remember that. That was, yes. Oh, that's hilarious. I haven't thought about that in a while.
Yeah, I
Oh, I
don't
love
remember his
academia.
name. He was an Anglican priest, I think, the guy who did it.
Hmm.
He basically what he did was he applied Max Müller's own theory
Hmm.
and method to Max Müller's himself. And then
Yeah.
he made an interpretation of him as
Yep.
a sun god and just showed
Incredible.
how ridiculous this approach
Yeah.
is, right? Now, um, you know, did people worship the sun back in the day? Probably. There's probably
Yeah.
some
Sure.
sun worship involved.
Yeah. But
And
it wasn't always this very monotheistic interpretation of this kind of hierarchy that we see. It's a really easy thing to attach a lot of importance to, and that doesn't mean that that wasn't true in pre-Christian traditions, but it just wasn't nearly to the extent that these scholars are claiming.
no,
Like, yes,
and
the sun is very important,
right.
but
And you can see the damage done in Old Norse mythology, right? Because you have, because of these scholars, you have people who still to this day believe that Odin's one eye represents the sun, that Baldur represents the sun, and you can just like go down the list, right? And
Mhm.
neither of these are correct. This became a big deal to the Völkisch movements in pre-Nazi Germany.
Mhm.
These movements that connected the idea of paganism and race to
Mhm.
Germanic people, like and synthesized all of this stuff to create very, racist movements that some of which then turned into Nazi movements later on. So they was also present with the Nazis in Nazi Germany and sort of like, uh, held up as a an idea about like pre-Christian traditions that then to them also signaled the whiteness of Christ and
Mm.
sort of like the claim that Christ is sort of a just another version of all of this, right?
Of course.
Right. So you get a crossover between, for instance, Balder and Christ
Yeah.
in this like Nazi versions of Old Norse mythology, right?
Mm.
And none of that really has any basis in the source material. You could you could, you know, talk about some overlap with the Christian myth of Christ in Baldur's death, but it's very vague and definitely an entirely different situation in the actual myth. And I know that Luch in Irish tradition actually follows a little bit of that same pattern. Can you talk a little bit to that?
Yeah, so Luch is his name means something like shining or bright. It's kind of a cognate with the Latin word lux, Lux. But we have a few really interesting stories about him. He's kind of this like young, youthful, masculine god who's really good at fighting and poetry, and he's very clever. And he's been equated a lot with the Greek god Apollo, who is a god that kind of deals with light and poetry. He's not the Greek sun god, who is Helios, who runs around in a chariot and draws the sun. But he is the god of light and illumination and knowledge. And Luch is kind of loosely related to all of these things. There's a really fun story about him defeating this big bad monster guy called Baelor of the Evil Eye, who can kill people with a glance. And Luch shoots him in the eye. I think it's with a spear. It might be with a rock shot from a sling. It varies in different versions. But Luch has a festival known as Luchtnasse, which is observed on the 1st of August. And it's a big market festival. A different observance of it vary from place to place, but it's a big both like commercial and seasonal festival because it's the coming to the end of summer. Fruits are in full bloom. It's a really good time to travel. You're kind of just waiting for the harvest, and it is heavily tied to the work that the sun has done throughout the year. So I think that's where also some of his loose associations with the sun come from, but there's not really actual material, at least from the Celtic corpus that we have available, saying that he is a sun god. But he's a very tempting figure for scholars to position as such.
Hmm. And yeah, and it's quite interesting because you can I know that Max Müller and his buddies back in the day did interpret exactly that story about his duel with Baelor as a sun myth again, right? So
Yes.
Baelor would be some kind of like evil version of the sun that might be causing some kind of
Mhm.
drought or something like that, and then Luke
Mhm.
shows up and all that stuff, and it's like,
Precisely.
okay, but there's also David and
Yeah.
Goliath. If you want to
Exactly.
find connections here, there's
There's
David and
like
Goliath, and there's the
there's
Cyclops and
Gilgamesh
Odysseus and
and yep, there's Odysseus and the Cyclops, there's Gilgamesh and something Baba Umbaba.
uh Umbaba. Yeah, that
Um,
sound
is it
kind of
Oh, this is so embarrassing. So
yeah.
it's a really common story archetype. So it's not shocking that something of that would show up in the Celtic tradition at all. But
And
you can
Thor and
see Luke's
Hrungnir
name.
as
Thorn yep,
yeah.
exactly. Gosh, yeah, there's so many examples of that exact formula. And you can
Hmm.
see Luke's name in so many place names in on the continent. Like there's Lyon, there's
Hmm. London would be
basically
one.
London.
Hmm.
There are a lot of places in so many places in France, and I think a few in northern Italy that are all escaping me right now, embarrassingly. Lyon's the one that I always remember for
Hmm.
some reason.
Which would
But
also
there's
be
if you look
London,
up,
right?
yeah,
Lyon is like the French version of Lugdunum or something like that.
yeah, Lugdunum,
Yeah, so
Londinium,
so that would be
yep,
London. Yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
I think there's a few rivers.
Hmm.
that carry his name. Yeah, so he's extremely prevalent in the toponyms. Just
Hmm.
thinking of the
Yeah.
word for place names. Yeah, so he's all
Yes.
over the place. He was a really big deal, and that's another reason that he's also seen as a possible sun god because
Yeah.
he is such a prevalent deity, and
Yeah.
there is a lot of evidence for him. So they think, oh, important person must be the sun, which
And
is
then
really frustrating.
there's also been theories about how him and Loki are the same figure. Um, because
Yeah,
because of a tenuous a theory about the names being the same, but at the end of the day, we actually
yeah.
don't have a good etymology for Loki. We don't
No,
know what that name means.
I've seen the argument for Luch and Logi, the
Yeah,
fire word,
yeah.
which does get attached to Loki
Hmm.
often because that's not
Yeah.
much of a consonant change, but I don't think there's very good evidence for that exact
No.
consonant shift. Sorry.
Yeah, no, there's not a yeah, it actually it goes from Old Norse, it goes the other way, right? It
Exactly.
goes from
Yeah.
K to G, not from
Yeah.
G to
And
K.
I think that's the same in a lot of Welsh languages as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, like anywhere that you have lenition, which is
Hmm.
a sound change where like m becomes the, k becomes g,
Hmm.
p also becomes v.
Hmm.
It always goes from k to g.
Hmm.
You're not really going to have g becoming k. You're not going to have lug becoming luke or
Yeah.
lok. Yeah.
No. And if anybody wants like like an actual modern language reference for all of this, just think about the fucked up way that the Danes say cake. If you know,
We've talked about this.
yes, I love to bring this out because like if
Oh.
you're Norwegian and you want cake, you will just say kake, right? Kake typically or something like that, or Kak
Mhm.
a. And we Danes down south, thanks to the Dutch primarily and a little bit of like Plattdeutsch influence, right? We say K instead, which is Kage, and it
Jesus.
sounds horrible.
Disgusting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
I'm
why did you
thinking
do
of,
that to cake of all
I don't
words?
know. I'm thinking of all the mutations in Welsh, which a lot of people complain about. And yeah, ptk becomes bdk.
Hmm.
And actually, there are a lot of words that start with G or GW, just completely lose the G in the beginning when there is
Hmm.
lenition. So there
Yeah,
you
just
go.
get rid of it.
K.
K.
What is that? Yeah.
It's that meme with the cat. Yep, that's what it is. Yeah.
Like
Uh,
what's the French word for I? Yeah.
Oi. Oi.
Yeah, yeah. I think it makes perfect sense.
You know what? There could be some French influence on all of this. Like the French do make some of the same weird guttural sounds as we Danes do. So
I
just
just
saying.
copy.
In
That
French,
could
it
be.
makes sense, but in Danish,
It
it's
makes perfect
just
sense in French.
sure, sure.
It does. I promise. I promise it does. You know what we say for cake in French? Gâteau. Perfectly normal. Every letter is accounted for.
Are we sure about that one?
Yes.
Okay.
And the O is EAU.
Yeah, of course it
Gâteau.
is. Okay, so if anybody was in doubt,
Oh,
something weird
anyway.
happened to several languages in Europe over the last 300 years. Um,
Yes.
yeah,
Mhm.
it's definitely like a northwestern coastal thing, right? So from Normandy and sort of like all the way up the coast into the Danish area. That's where people have just been screwing up languages for the last 400 years at this point. So, okay, enough of that, and back to the sun worship, right?
Yep. Sun cults.
Yeah, the sun cult, right? So we have all of these like petroglyphs in Scandinavia and the British Isles and Ireland and so on that is, like are typically interpreted as a sun cult, like depictions of
Mhm.
sun worship, all that kind of stuff. And I know in the Scandinavian context, the primary culprit when it comes to all of this is a Danish archaeologist named Flemming Kaul, who is probably still at the National Museum in Denmark. He's the one who's sort of like written the book on why the petroglyphs in Sweden, Norway, Denmark should be interpreted as a myth about the sun moving across the sky and all of that. Because sometimes we see the sun and we see boats, we see
Mhm.
horses, chariots, like referencing back to the Greeks, right? I mean, we also have that in
Yep.
Old Norse mythology,
Yep.
this description of how sun and moon are people that actually draw the chariots that, or ride the chariots that draw the sun and the moon, right? So there's
Hmm.
like
Yep. You
compounding
get that in
multiple
Greek
stories.
stuff. You
Yeah.
get sunboats in Egypt as well, like
Which aren't
solar
they
boats or.
are and isn't there like a this connection between ISIS and boats? And is that the same or similar to the
Yeah.
sun boat stuff?
Um, Boats were really big because the Nile was a big deal in
Yeah.
Egyptian mythology. There probably is some connection between Isis and boats. There's several sun deities in Egyptian mythology. There's also
Mm-hmm.
several moon deities.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone, like the most well-known sun deity in Egyptian mythology is probably Ra, the
Yeah.
um the falcon-headed sun god. There's usually like they make it really obvious. There's always like a
It's like
big red disc
yeah.
above their
Just
heads
like if you
representing the
were
sun.
in doubt, right?
Yeah, or like Hathor, the horned cow goddess.
Yes.
She often has like a red disc between her horns. Um,
Hmm.
they made a big deal about the sun because there is a lot of sun in Egypt.
That is true.
And also not very many others. You have sun and the season when the Nile floods, and
Hmm.
that's the most exciting change of season that you get in Egypt.
Right.
But yeah, this idea of the sun and the moon being pulled by some kind of land or water-based vehicle is
Hmm.
so ubiquitous.
Yeah,
It's
and
yeah,
we
it's
have that in Scandinavia too, right? We
Mhm.
have these Bronze Age depictions of that, and at the end of the day, I would say that the interpretations that we get, especially if you go to the any museum in Scandinavia that has that has some kind of focus on these petroglyphs. So that could be, for instance, the national museums that give you a
Mhm.
general tour of Danish, Swedish, Norwegian prehistory, right? But it could also be local museums in connection with actual petroglyphs, like in
Mhm.
Tanum or elsewhere
Mhm.
in Scandinavia, right? You will get this story about how the sun moves from above to below, right? That's part of the interpretation that it goes in the underworld or something like that in
Mhm.
the wintertime, right? And it's not impossible that that's how people thought about it and all that kind of stuff, but it is just slightly problematic that we sort of just quite typically represent this, especially in Denmark, as just, oh, that's just a fact about how people believe in it because we
Yeah,
do not know. We do not
we
know that
just
that's
don't
actually
know.
they're like
Um,
carvings and they're nice and they seem to
yeah.
depict the sun once in a while, but they also depict a lot of other things. And
Yes.
so let's maybe chill out about that. If I remember correctly, the National Museum in Sweden, in Stockholm, actually has a big disclaimer on it that says this is a theory, not
Good.
not
I
actually
think
how we,
all museums should have that on
right?
on many things, most things probably.
Yeah.
Um,
And it goes back to that, originally it goes back to this the tendency to interpret pre-Christian religions as like sun worship. And
Hmm.
to give you just some, so we already talked about how crazy that gets, right, with Max Müller and all that kind of stuff. But to give you some examples of how weird it got, especially with the Nazis, right, is that they equated the idea of sun worship with like ancient civilization and
Hmm.
therefore the most civilized people in their eyes, the Aryans, right, which was sort of like a placeholder for Indo-Europeans, or Indo-Europeans who look a certain way, at least. And then for that reason, whenever they ran around and found what they considered evidence of sun worship, right, which was often tied to the swastika, which is a
Yeah.
very common symbol, prehistoric symbol you find in a lot of
Yeah.
places, they were like, aha, Aryans were here, right? Or these people descend from Aryans. And for that reason, for instance, they counted some of the Plains Indians and Hopi here
Mm.
in America as Aryans as well, because they interpreted their traditions as sun worship as well, right? So that just tells you just how far out you can get with these like theories, right? Like, because you're based on not on actual evidence. What you're
Yeah.
basing everything on is um ideology, right?
Mm.
And that's also what Max Müller did. His ideology was an Indo-Europeanist slash Christian ideology, and Nazis were, Aryanist ideology. So, yeah, that's pretty bizarre.
Yeah, that's really bizarre. And that's, I mean, I think that is such a good example of what can happen when you start just taking theories and running with them as a basis for an entire framework of approaching things that you just don't have a lot of evidence for. And as frustrating as it is to not have the evidence that you want, it's really dangerous to kind of fill things in with theories and assumptions that don't really have a place there. And that's how you get like today, a lot of scholars are like rethinking these things, taking a more holistic approach to the evidence that we do have instead of trying to cram the evidence into an expected framework or an expected narrative or a kind of prefabricated methodology that doesn't actually apply to it. And it's made for a lot of really interesting reinterpretations of things like pre-Christian religions or northern traditions or relationships between certain societies and natural phenomena or certain societies and other civilizations. So it's a really good thing to think about when examining these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's actually a nice note to end on with all of
Mhm.
this. I want to thank everybody for listening to this podcast. Thank you for joining us. I
Mhm.
hope you have a wonderful new year, even though January might suck. And I hope that you will find us and follow us on all the social media channels that we
Yes.
have. Yeah, we're out there on Instagram, we're on Blue
Mhm.
Sky, we're on
Mhm.
TikTok, and you
Mhm.
can find us on YouTube if you want to see our pretty faces. And you can also, of course, always listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast. We will be there. So,
We will in
yeah,
your ears. Well,
yes.
excellent. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about the weather.
Yes, thank you for for listening to us ramble about the weather for a little bit. Oh, and the last thing, of course, support us on Patreon. We badly need your money.
Yes, please.
No, it's
Appreciate it. All
it's
right.
always it's always nice to get a little bit of support. We got extra stuff up there. We're
Mhm.
doing a couple of things. I sometimes upload some more philosophical podcasts, just me
Mm.
rambling about a topic, kind of like in the vein of the earlier version of the Sacred Flame. You can find it there, and it will also be a good place to get firsthand information about stuff that we do if we go out and
Mhm.
give talks somewhere, or
Mhm.
you know, um, if there's some other kind of event or whatever that might be interesting to people who follow us. So
Yeah.
yeah, give it a thought. All right. Thank you very much, everybody.